Two quick things before we get into the meat of today's video. Firstly, this. Inconvenience much? Yes. Second, congratulations to NASA for landing the InSight rover on Mars successfully. I keenly await the results of your attempt to dig 16 feet into Mars' crust, and of course testing seismic activity on the Red Planet. Now the subject of today's video is going to be one of fantasy, one that I certainly as a teenager loved. Hell, I even painted the miniatures when Games Workshop had the rights to do so. I still have my Gimli. I like Gim. So if that isn't enough of a giveaway, today we're going to be talking about Lord of the Rings and how massively racist it is. Have I clickbaited everyone enough yet? Cool. So the story comes from the Daily Mail, where the Lord of the Rings series has been branded racist by a science fiction writer who claims the orcs are discriminated against and written as inferior. Orcs have always been portrayed as weak-minded, violent thugs. As far as species goes, they are the blunt instrument, those that love to fight. They are the visual representation of the football hooligan if they could in fact weaponize properly. And that's rich considering orcs don't form ranks very well, and yet would still be a more formidable opponent than the hooligan, I guess. In hindsight, it's a terrible comparison. If you look at other areas where orcs exist, you have Warhammer Age of Sigmar, but we'll go before that. The orcs rallied behind the strongest, but were always looking for a fight. Their currency is teeth, or is that only in 40k? We'll get to 40k in a minute as well. They are the fighters. In 40k they were created by a race called the Old Ones. Much like the Eldar, they were created to fight the Necrons. The ones in 40k, typically those who are deemed the bestest, are the biggest. The ones with the best shiny bits. But again, they're not the smartest. But they are also equally cunning. Not baldric cunning, actually cunning. Something which does in fact translate across many different areas where orcs feature. Cunning is a trait. Something you notice in the Lord of the Rings films, in fact, as they are the inferior to the Uruk-hai, who are superior. They are the, this is going to be appropriate in a minute, the master race, a mixture of orc and goblin. The point is the traits that most associate with orcs, brutality, fighting, viciousness, cunning, hold true in many different areas where orcs exist. How we determine how they are in fact inferior is entirely subjective. If we put it down to the mind, then yes, they are inferior as far as the generalized intellect goes. However, they are ingenious. In Lord of the Rings, they serve a purpose. They are Sauron's army. They are his blunt tool to conquer the world. They are weak enough, mentally, to be manipulated by him. Him being, after all, only interested in controlling all life. There was a saying in one of the films, "The age of the orc is coming," something which I don't believe Sauron would have wanted, or allowed. I had initially, upon reading this article, believed that maybe the author was trying to argue from the perspective that maybe the orcs are a portrayal of the black person, but I don't believe that's the case. I believe he's arguing from the position of wanting to give orcs the chance to integrate within human society and possibly procreate with them and breed humans out of existence. Or create, the hybrid. Whether or not that could in fact work. Bear in mind here, orcs have a violent tendency. Do you really want that within any culture that is trying to progress? Or kingdom, for that matter, in the context of Lord of the Rings and Middle-earth. Oh, and to add to the orcs being cunning, cough cough, Azog, cough cough, come on. American author Andy Duncan said British author J.R.R. Tolkien depicted evil creatures such as orcs as worse than others and said this had dire consequences for society, which is all quite amusing. And to come back to the master race comment about the Uruk-hai, it's quite amusing that Tolkien was always quite a fierce critic of racism, especially that of Nazi Germany in the 30s and 40s. He depicted a master race and then them being destroyed. Come on, the guy put subtlety onto the page. It was quite amusing, and I don't truly believe that depiction of evil creatures, keyword creatures, has any dire consequences for society, because we as humans do not treat, well, in our developed world, anywhere near as badly those that feature in Middle-earth. They still have gender roles. we don't have orcs yet. Although, there are some that do cosplay as that. Maybe there's a thing for that. A fetish. Maybe. I do vaguely recall being told about World of Warcraft when I was in my second year of university. Didn't think it was a thing. Someone showed me. It is a thing. Don't look it up. Payment has been accepted. Duncan Told Podcast, Geek's Guide to the Galaxy, run by Wired Magazine. It's hard to miss the repeated notion in Tolkien that some races are just worse than others, or that some people are just worse than others. Did you and I read the same books? And I don't just mean the original trilogy. I also mean The Hobbit, and every other piece of literature Tolkien released. There were races that wanted to conquer other lands. There were others that were happy to exist within their lands. They then had to defend their lands from the invader, one of whom, a race completely unique to himself, wanted to conquer all of them, even though he didn't have a body to do it. And his army were basically brain dead, easy to manipulate. They were lackeys. This is not some wide conspiracy to make some grand point about race. And to be honest, some people are just worse than others. You'd be hard-pressed to find somebody who is better than everyone on this planet at everything. You'd be hard-pressed to find someone who isn't better than you at something. So as far as I am concerned, I tend to agree with that there are people that are just worse than others. And the comment that some races are just worse than others, that is a very generalized statement. If we want to localize it within humanity, then we can certainly isolate intellect traits, violent tendency traits. We can expand it further, of course, to include ideologues, if you wish. I'm going to be general on that one because I don't want to be caught out saying something I might regret. Cough any religion ever. Cough. The point. He was just telling a story, and by doing so, and because of the success of it, created an entire world. Whether intended or not, he managed to create a world that many things could exist within. And yeah, the orcs were the brutes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are somehow oppressed, or treated as worse, or created to exist and be portrayed as worse, when they're not human master race, remember. Also, I keep getting told by you pesky pinkskins. And this seems to me, in the long term, if you embrace this too much, it has dire consequences for yourself and for society. So now it's not a grander point about what the stories are trying to tell you, but your perception on races. And because the stories within contain some conflict that was resolved with violence, you believe this is not very beneficial to society's progression, and therefore stories like this should not be thought of in any high regard. At least that's what I take from it. I know he hasn't said it outright, I know, but that is what infer? Let's go with that. Speaking about this story to the podcast, he added, I can easily imagine that a lot of these people that were doing the Dark Lord's bidding were doing so out of simple self-preservation and so forth. A lot of these creatures that were raised out of the earth had not a great deal of choice in the matter of what to do. I had this very complicated sense of the politics of all that. I feel like somebody's missed out on the entire point of the orc anyway. And I would also point out there are a few theories about how the orcs are even created. Some are not just from the earth, as he himself mentions. It is also a suggestion that they were descended from East Elves captured by Melkor, with their minds, bodies distorted and corrupted. And then the third being them being simply sentient beasts. The more extreme one also being them being fallen Mayor. If that's pronounced wrong, I do apologise. Where a fallen Mayor had taken an orc form. Mr. Writer person of science fiction who I've never heard of, please do your homework, and don't speak generally about something you clearly haven't invested much time in doing your research on. J.R.R. Tolkien put a lot of time and effort into what he wrote. You may not like it, but to me that's just because you're a very petty person who has picked up on a small point and made it seem like a much larger one, as if you are speaking from some profound position. Anyway, long live Gimli. Have a lovely day, everyone.